It started, as it always does, with an error. A single line of corrupted data in a 72-hour render, 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. The Kyiv sky was the color of wet concrete, a light drizzle misting the panoramic windows of Quantum Light Studios. From my office on the 32nd floor, the city was a smudge of gray and gold. The air smelled of stale coffee and the low-level ozone hum of overworked machines. Liam, one of our best junior artists, stood at my door. He had the look of a man who had watched a sandcastle, painstakingly built, get kicked over. His face was pale, his hands fidgeted with the hem of his worn-out hoodie. He said his final shot for the Kronos Drifters trailer was a bust. Frame 9742. A single pixel flared into a supernova of magenta noise, corrupting everything that followed. The client delivery was in 2 days. Re-rendering was not an option. I took a sip of my tea. Lapsang Souchong. It tasted of wood smoke and quiet calculation. I brought the ceramic mug, a heavy, hand-thrown piece of black clay, with me to his workstation. The artist's pit was a controlled chaos of dual monitors, graphics tablets, and half-empty energy drink cans. Liam's desk was littered with concept sketches of chrome spaceships and alien flora. He smelled of anxiety. I placed my mug on a clean coaster and leaned over his shoulder. My fingers found the keyboard. The mechanical clicks were a familiar rhythm. Control-F grep. I bypassed the user interface. The UI was for artists. I spoke the machine's native language. A few lines of code and I was inside the render log. A river of alphanumeric data flowed up the screen. To Liam, it was gibberish. To me, it was a story. I saw the problem in less than a minute. A memory allocation fault in one of the farm's render nodes. It had assigned an invalid texture address. It was a simple fix, if you knew where to look. I isolated the corrupted data packet, patched the address from a cached version, and recompiled the frame sequence. I hit enter. The magenta supernova vanished. The frame resolved into a perfect, photorealistic image of a ship tearing through a nebula. The light catching on the fuselage was so real you could feel the cold of space. That light was my signature. Liam let out a breath he'd been holding since sunrise. He looked at me with a kind of baffled reverence. That was the respect I had earned. Not in boardrooms, but in the digital trenches. My office was my sanctuary. It was sparse, but every object had a purpose. On the wall opposite my desk were 6 framed botanical illustrations of carnivorous plants. Perfect, logical, beautiful systems that devoured the unwary. My desk was a single slab of reclaimed oak. On it sat my monitor, my keyboard, and a worn, leather-bound notebook. Inside, I didn't write words. I sketched code architecture with a Pentel 0.5mm mechanical pencil. It helped me think. This entire studio, its reputation, its 9-figure contracts, ran on a system I had designed in this office, sketched in that notebook. It was called the Prism Engine, and it was mine. It wasn't just a piece of software, it was the culmination of my doctoral thesis in fractal geometry and light refraction. It was a decade of my life. It was a digital extension of my own mind. He had no idea what he was really trying to steal. The engine was me. The infection arrived on a Monday. Gideon Price, son of the founder, armed with an MBA from a school his father had endowed, and a suit that cost more than my car, but fit like a rental. He was appointed the new head of production. He had his father's name, but none of his quiet intelligence. His first all-hands meeting was a masterclass in corporate nonsense. He stood at the front of the room, shifting his weight from one shiny Italian shoe to the other. He couldn't stand still. It was a tell. He was terrified. "We need to actionize our deliverables," he said, his voice a little too loud. "We must pivot our synergy to enhance our value-add paradigm." I watched the faces of my engineers. They were trying not to laugh. I remained perfectly still, my expression neutral. I had learned long ago that in the corporate world, the best defense was a complete lack of reaction. He pointed to a slide showing Prism's render time metrics. "Why does it take 12 hours to render a complex scene?" he asked, looking directly at me. "In the age of the cloud, can't we just make it render in 4K faster?" The room went silent. The question was so profoundly ignorant it was like asking a master watchmaker why he doesn't just use a sundial. I unmuted my microphone. Render time is a function of computational complexity, Gideon, I said, my voice even. The photorealism we achieve is based on the Highland refraction algorithm, which calculates trillions of light paths per frame. We can't make it faster any more than we can make gravity go up. We can, however, optimize the render queue by investing in the server upgrades I requested last quarter. He blinked. He hadn't read my budget proposal. Of course he hadn't. He didn't understand. He just nodded and said, "Let's put a pin in that and circle back." He never circled back. The personal slights started the next day. They were small, petty, the corporate equivalent of 1,000 paper cuts, an email sent to the whole department CCing his father. "Good input from the team today. Thanks, Rhonda." Not a typo, a power play, a way of saying, "You are not important enough for me to remember your name." I didn't reply. I simply forwarded the email to my personal archive with the subject line, "Incompetence." 2 weeks later, my server upgrade budget was officially denied. The reason cited was fiscal streamlining. That same afternoon, I saw Gideon's new car in the executive parking garage, a Porsche Panamera in a particularly offensive shade of metallic blue, a company lease. He was a child playing dress-up in his father's office. A cruel, insecure child who broke other people's toys because he didn't know how to play with them, and he had decided Prism was his new toy. The breaking point came on a Thursday. It was the most important meeting of the year. A video pitch to Ilya Volkov, the legendary director whose bleak, beautiful science fiction films were triumphs of visual storytelling. Landing his next project would secure the studio for 5 years. My team had spent a month creating a tech demo, a single 60-second shot designed to showcase everything Prism could do. It was flawless. I had personally reviewed every frame. 10 minutes before the call, my lead engineer sent me a frantic message. Gideon had bypassed protocol. He had forced a massive, unoptimized scene file from another project into the high-priority render queue. He wanted to add more value to the presentation. He had, in effect, thrown a boulder into the delicate gears of a Swiss watch. There was no time to fix it. I watched the network traffic monitor on my second screen. A thick, red line spiked into the ceiling. He was choking the system. Volkov appeared on the main conference screen. He was a severe-looking man with intelligent eyes. He nodded once. The presentation began. When it came time for our demo, the video stuttered. It lagged. Frames dropped. The fluid, breathtaking shot my team had created was a jittery mess. I could feel the blood drain from my face. My team, gathered in the room, looked devastated. Gideon started to sweat. I saw his panic. He needed a scapegoat. I unmuted my mic to explain the network bottleneck. Before I could speak, he cut me off. "It seems our legacy architecture can't handle a forward-thinking workflow," Gideon said, looking not at me but at Volkov. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Rihanna's system is a bit brittle. We're looking at more robust, off-the-shelf solutions for a project of this scale." The air in the room turned to ice. He hadn't just insulted my work. He had called my life's work obsolete. He had humiliated me in front of a potential client, my peers, and my own team. He had declared me irrelevant. Volkov's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The pitch was dead. In that moment, watching the digital world I had built with my own hands be so casually, so cruelly dismissed by an idiot, something inside me shifted. The professional patience I had cultivated for 15 years evaporated. It was replaced by something cold, something precise, something that felt wonderfully, terrifyingly calm. That night, I went home to my quiet apartment overlooking the Dnipro River. My dog, Pixel, a retired racing greyhound with bones like a bundle of sticks, lifted his head from his bed as I came in. I sat on the floor and stroked his velvet ears. He rested his long, elegant head on my knee. I didn't feel anger anymore. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. This was different. It was cold, it was clear, it was the feeling of a complex problem that had finally resolved itself into a simple, elegant solution. I opened my laptop. I went to my personal cloud storage. In a password-protected folder, I had a scanned copy of every document I had ever signed with Quantum Light Studios. I opened the first one. My original employment contract, dated October 1st, 2010. I was 27 years old when I signed it, a kid with a half-finished PhD and an idea. Gideon's father, a shrewd but fair man, had taken a chance on me. My lawyer at the time, an old-school bulldog, had insisted on a clause I had almost forgotten about. Section 9, subsection C, the Key Developer and Intellectual Property Clause. I scrolled down, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. There it was. The language was dense, but the meaning was unequivocal. It stipulated that the core intellectual property of any system I developed, specifically the Highland refraction algorithm, would revert to me if my employment was terminated without cause, or if the integrity of the core code was compromised by unauthorized personnel. What he didn't understand was that he wasn't just firing an employee, he was breaching a 15-year-old contract. He was handing me back the keys to the kingdom. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't defeat. It was the discovery of a weapon I myself had forged and hidden in plain sight. The next morning, I began my preparations. They were small, quiet acts of war. First, I initiated a full backup of the Prism source code, including all my development notes and the original thesis papers, to an encrypted offshore server. The progress bar filled with agonizing slowness, each percentage point a small victory. Next, I called my lawyer. I presented the situation as a hypothetical. He listened patiently. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he chuckled. Hypothetically, he said, "Your old bulldog of a lawyer was a genius. This contract is ironclad." At the office, I watched with a kind of detached clinical amusement as Gideon's new optimization consultants began their work. They were a pair of slick 20-somethings from a big-name firm. They talked about disruptive innovation and agile frameworks. They stared at Prism's command line interface as if it were written in ancient Sanskrit. They were completely, utterly lost. I had built this system with one hidden feature he would never find in any manual. A feature designed just for a moment like this. Gideon, emboldened by my silence, believed he had won. His arrogance swelled. He saw my refusal to engage as weakness. He strode through the studio like a conquering hero. He scheduled pointless meetings. He sent out memos filled with his signature brand of meaningless jargon. He pushed me too far, just as I knew he would. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the failed pitch. He called me into his office. It had been his father's office. It was a corner suite, all glass and chrome. He hadn't changed a thing. He was just occupying the space. "Rihanna," he said, leaning back in the large leather chair. "The consultants need full root access to the Prism core. They believe there are redundancies that can be streamlined." I kept my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I kept my breathing even. "That is a breach of security protocol," I said. "Root access to the core is restricted. The system's integrity depends on it." He waved a dismissive hand. "We need to be agile, Rihanna. We can't be held back by old rules. Give them the access. Number." The word hung in the air between us. It was so quiet, so simple. But in that office, it was a declaration of war. His face tightened. A dull red flush crept up his neck. "What did you say?" I said no, Gideon. Granting unauthorized personnel root access could destabilize the entire pipeline. I will not do it. His composure finally cracked. He stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You are not a team player, Rihanna. Your refusal to synergize is impacting our deliverables. This is insubordination." I simply looked at him. I let him fill the silence. "You're fired," he said, the words spitting out of his mouth. "Get your things. Security will escort you out." He smirked then, a triumphant, ugly little expression. He thought he had cut out the tumor. He had no idea he had just activated the poison pill. I didn't say a word. I just nodded once, turned, and walked out of his office. As security walked me to the elevator, my pass already deactivated, I felt a profound sense of calm. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. At home, I poured myself a glass of very expensive whiskey. I sat on my balcony and watched the evening lights of Kiev flicker on. On my phone, I opened a simple app I had written years ago for monitoring server uptime, but it had a hidden function. I entered a password, the screen changed, it now displayed a single set of numbers in a clean, sans serif font. A countdown timer, 29 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, 58 seconds. Gideon had revoked my credentials at 4:15 p.m. The dead man's switch in Prism's core had activated. In exactly 30 days, if my administrator access was not restored, the Highland refraction algorithm would be irrevocably encrypted. Prism would be nothing more than an empty shell, a cathedral without a god. I took a slow sip of whiskey. The game had begun. The first 2 weeks were quiet. Gideon sent out a studio-wide memo announcing my departure and his bold new vision for the production pipeline. He boasted about streamlining and efficiency. He was a fool, shouting in a hurricane, convinced the wind was his own voice. I spent my days walking Pixel along the river, reading books on theoretical physics, and talking to my lawyer. We prepared our case. Every document, every email, every line of the contract was assembled into an unbreachable fortress. On day 17, I got the first call. It was Liam. He sounded frantic. "Rihanna," he said, his voice a hushed whisper. "Nothing is working. The renders are failing. Everything looks flat. The light is wrong." "I know," I said. "What's happening?" "It's a long story, Liam. Just document everything. Every error. Every failed render. Keep a log." On day 24, the chaos at Quantum Light was an open secret. Deadlines for 3 major projects were missed. The flagship project, Ethelgard's Fall, a massive fantasy epic that was supposed to be their big awards contender, was completely stalled. The studio was hemorrhaging money. Gideon, I heard, was in a perpetual state of rage, shouting at everyone from the janitors to his father's old partners. The consultants had been fired. The error code was always the same. A simple, elegant message I had written myself. ERR_HRA_AUTH_FAIL. Highland refraction algorithm authentication failure. They were flying blind. They were trying to fix a Swiss watch with a hammer. On day 29, the summons came. My lawyer called. "They've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow at 10 a.m., he said. "They're going to try to sue you for sabotage. Be ready." I was ready. I had been ready for 15 years. The next morning, I dressed carefully. A tailored charcoal gray suit. A simple silk blouse. I looked like a woman who owned 51% of a company. I looked like a woman who could not be broken. The boardroom was on the top floor. The air was thick with panic and stale coffee. All the senior partners were there, Gideon's father, looking 10 years older than he had a month ago. And at the head of the table, Gideon himself. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was rumpled. His eyes were bloodshot. He was sweating. He was in the middle of a frantic, rambling speech. He was blaming me. Sabotage. A disgruntled former employee. Malicious code. My lawyer and I entered without knocking. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to us. Gideon stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I believe you're talking about me." Gideon's father found his voice first. "Rihanna, what is the meaning of this? What have you done to our system?" I looked at the old man. "Not our system," I said. "My system. A system you have been using without a license for the past 29 days. A confused murmur went through the room. Gideon scoffed. "That's ridiculous." "That system is company property." "Is it?" I asked, turning my gaze to him for the first time. I let the question hang in the air. My lawyer placed a single file folder on the polished mahogany table. Inside that folder, he said, is a copy of Rihanna Hyland's original employment contract. I would direct you to Section 9, subsection C. It states quite clearly that the intellectual property for the Highland refraction algorithm reverts to Miss Highland upon termination without cause. Gideon's face went pale. That's not possible. I terminated her for insubordination, he sputtered. Did you? I asked, because my records and the recording I am about to play indicate you fired me for refusing to breach security protocols and endanger the stability of the pipeline, an action which, I might add, also falls under the compromising the integrity of the core code portion of the clause. I took out my phone. I placed it on the table and pressed play. Gideon's voice filled the silent room. Arrogant, condescending. You are not a team player, Rihanna. Your refusal to synergize is impacting our deliverables. You're fired. The look on his face when he realized his own words had just signed his professional death warrant was more satisfying than any bonus I had ever received. It was a beautiful, exquisite tapestry of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. I watched his world collapse in real time. His father stared at him, his expression a mixture of fury and profound disappointment. The other partners just looked at the table. No one could meet my eye. The system isn't sabotaged, I continued, my voice cutting through the humiliation. It has not been damaged. It has simply done what it was designed to do. Protect its creator's intellectual property. In 12 hours at 4:15 p.m., the encryption will be permanent. The algorithm, and with it, the future of this studio, will be lost for good. A new kind of panic filled the room. This was no longer about blame. It was about survival. Gideon's father looked at me. What do you want, Rihanna? I let the question linger. I looked at his son, a broken, pathetic man-child, and then I looked back at him. I don't want my old job back, I said. I want his. I want the title of head of production, I want full creative and technical autonomy, and I want a 20% equity stake in Quantum Light Studios. Non-negotiable. There was a long silence. Then Gideon's father nodded. Done, he said. He looked at his son. Gideon, you're fired. Get out. The final scene was perfect. Weeks later, I sat in my new office, Gideon's old office, his father's old office. The view of the city was magnificent. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, glinting off the framed botanical prints I had hung on the wall. My dog, Pixel, was asleep on a plush new bed in the corner. The air smelled of my Lapsang Souchong tea and the faint, clean scent of new beginnings. On my desk, beside my leather notebook, lay a copy of this month's VFX World magazine. The cover story was about the miraculous last-minute turnaround of Ethelgard's fall. The director, in his interview, specifically praised the unparalleled genius and visionary leadership of Rihanna Highland. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam, a single image, the final shot from the Chronos Drifters trailer. It was beautiful. Perfect. Underneath, he had written one word, thanks. I took a sip of my tea. I opened my notebook to a fresh, clean page. I picked up my 0.5mm pencil. I was no longer just the architect. I was the master builder. And I was just getting started.